Hello, everybody who's joined from the random world of the internet. So good afternoon to those in the UK, good morning to those in the US, and good whatever it is for those of you that are elsewhere in the world. So really delighted to be having the conversation with you today. But most importantly, I am really enthused by the fact that we've got the Turnkey twins back together. So welcome, Tom. It's great to be collaborating with you on these webinars again. It's been far too long, but glad to see that everything still works now that you're over in the US.
Good to see you, mate.
So,
nice and warm over here.
So today is all about SAP IDM, but not all about SAP IDM. It's more to the point about how do we take into account what the latest and greatest news is within the SAP IDM community and see how do we move that forward into the next generation of identity and access governance. So the webinar title, New Territory Ahead, is pretty much what we're going into today. But beforehand, let's talk about who's talking. As everybody knows, it's all about me on these sorts of things. So putting my name first, I'm Simon Persin. I'm the host of today's webinar, and I've got the fantastic job title of the Global Head of Consulting for Turnkey. Still based out of the UK, but fundamentally my role on this is to hopefully tee up Tom with a load of balls that he can smash out of the park and see how we can get through this. But within the organization, I'm now pretty much responsible for what we offer to the marketplace and how we get it done to the highest of possible standards. Tom, please give a brief overview as to you and your role.
Yeah, Tom Venables, Enterprise Solutions Director is my title, which is a grand way of saying I try and span all of our service offerings, very similar to Simon, but linking the worlds of risk management with the GRC functionality, access governance, identity, cybersecurity, application security, making the coffee and everything else that we cover. I've been securing SAP systems for 20 years now, 16 of them with Turnkey, so got a pretty good handle on it, and I'm customer facing a lot of the time, so I actually hear the questions from our customers that we're going to be talking about today.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tom. And as Tom's mentioned, the magical word of questions, we want to try and leave a fair amount of space to answer some of those questions. So if you do have any, please feel free to use the Q&A function on the webinar controls. I'm sure you're all familiar with that. It's been a number of years since we've been doing these sorts of things. So get those questions in there. We can't guarantee to answer all of them live, but if we can, we will. So yeah, please use that. And we'll try and hold as many of them off to the end so that Tom and I get the value out of hearing each other's voices throughout the earlier stages of it. So let's get into it.
Absolutely.
So what we're trying to cover today, and hopefully we've got enough time to do so, is just taking a little bit of a whistle-stop tour through some of the features and functions and the latest and greatest updates for what's actually happened in this space. So we're looking at what we know about some of the new news that's come through across both the identity and access management solutions, but also taking in some of the learnings and some of the understandings that we've got about the new GRC technology sets and products that are coming out from SAP as well. As well as just having some of those newsreel items, we're going to be taking a little bit more of a look as to what that means for our clients, what that means for the services that we might be looking to implement, and also what's important for our clients to understand about where they go from here. So considering some of those implementation steps, some of those strategic direction steps, but ideally trying to get as well to some of the questions that are burning for you and what we've seen from the clients that we've been working with since that news dropped. So let's get into it, hey? The news on the street. Well, it's not brand spanking new news, but certainly it's relatively recent. And so the answers to what this question is all about, what is the latest on SAP IGA, is fundamentally the announcement that SAP's identity management solution has been confirmed as being end of life from 2027. Now, that does still mean that we've got extended support up until 2020 for those clients that are still using identity management. But fundamentally, what it means is that there's going to be no ongoing feature developments and no replacement for an on-premise SAP identity management solution.
Yep.
So that's really the headline act. But as with all of these things, there's a few other sub-headlines that are coming through as well. That I think we've heard as recently as March that there is a new SAP GRC solution. So that's the collective term for the access control, process control, and risk management co-deployment. And that has been announced as having a successor scheduled to be in and around 2026 that's going to be architecturally embedded within the HANA environments. So there's a little bit more nuance to that we can obviously go on to as we look at it. But really, the headline act is no more SAP IDM from December 2027.
It's
Now,
worth
Tom,
highlighting as well that this is a general sunsetting of a lot of the existing NetWeaver components that we all know, maybe love, but are definitely familiar with. So not just identity management, not just GRC being sunset in 2027, but also tools like Solution Manager. Some of the functionality that we rely on to secure the environments, things like configuration validation or extension reports that are being managed through that, those will move to cloud ALM, application lifecycle management. And a number of customers are obviously exploring those cloud-enabled solutions, embarking on the S/4HANA journey. What we're talking about here is that the pieces that secure and govern access to those systems are also going to be transforming as well.
Interesting. Now, I know that you were in the SAP Insider Conference in Las Vegas earlier in the year. Was this met with a great exhalation of breath, or just a little bit of, okay, so what, from those attendees?
Yeah, there's a lot of confusion out there amongst customers at the moment, understandably so. Those that are using IDM are saying, well, we've seen an announcement, and we'll talk more about this in a moment, that you're backing Microsoft for some elements of that. There is confusion about whether people should be using IAG, or the cloud-based version of access controls, whether they should be backing an enterprise-level identity and access governance solution, and integrating SAP with that. What's happening with access controls? What do they do with their existing process controls? How are they going to migrate? What does the technical upgrade path look like? What does license uplift look like? Not all of those questions have hard and fast answers yet. Those of you who are familiar with the SAP roadmaps will know that they haven't published anything official yet, but we do know that things need to change. And a lot of that needs to take into account what you're doing at your enterprise level. What are you doing with your ERPs? What are you doing with your wider identity governance solution? You know, most breaches these days happen not because somebody hacked in or used a SQL injection or any complicated code exploits or anything like that. It's misuse of internal identity. So, you know, we were chatting the other day and saying, what's an internal attack? You know, even somebody coming in externally is probably misusing an internal identity these days. And identity is your first and best protection against those elements. So it's a little bit complicated to unpick. There weren't a huge amount of hard and fast answers, but hopefully we'll get into some of those questions and help people unpick it and know at least where to start by the end of this.
Fantastic, fantastic. So before we get on to the real nub of the identity management side of things, again, just wanted to pick up a little bit about the announcement of this GRC 2026 change. As we're all very much aware, the identity management processes are often augmented by access control processes and access governance processes, which are realistically underpinned in the SAP world by these components. So this is quite pivotal to recognize that there is a new and an ongoing on-premise type solution that's going to replace the current access control 12 systems. Now, I know that features are likely to be up for debate, and there's always going to be that great big asterisk of roadmap items will be subject to change at any point in time. But what do we know about what this new release will bring? Even though it's my historical stomping ground, you were far closer to the product owners in that SAP Insider Conference. So what were they talking about as to the features and functions that might be available within this release?
Yeah, first and foremost, GRC 2026 is a working title. It's almost certainly not going to be called that, but this is the shorthand that we're using at the moment. It is going to be built on a new technology stack. It's going to be an entirely new product suite, and so it has to have a new name.
Of course.
So we'll probably have GRC in the title somewhere, but yeah, we don't know what it's called fully. The big changes are that it's going to be one integrated stack. So where we had a more modular approach with people buying access controls, buying process controls, buying BIS, possibly deploying them separately, etc. This is all going to be on one technology stack. Now, I think that represents quite a good opportunity for customers. Access controls can be seen as a bit of a cost center to customers. But once you start to leverage some of the automations that are available in the other modules, you can really demonstrate a return on the investment in these control solutions. So I think that's a positive thing. One of the key technical changes is it's going to support HANA only. So we know that HANA is the preferred solution for SAP going forward. But yeah, it's not going to be NetWeaver compatible. So the transformation is going to have to come. We don't have a huge amount of details on that effortless upgrade path, although we know that they are looking to be able to port functionality over from the legacy GRC systems. We got that commitment in the room that they want to make it as seamless as possible. So the hope is that that will be a stress-free migration to the new stack. A lot of the features and functionality that you're familiar with in the existing GRC, especially if you've been adopting a number of the risk management, audit management, business integrity screening type components, will be ported across. So you'll be able to maintain your controls environment. But the key one is HANA only, definitely not GRC version 13.
Super. Good to know. Good to know. And yeah, I think the important point there about supporting the wider digital transformation and being able to allow people to transition to some of these new tools without too much additional rework or effort that's required is going to be an interesting one there. But what we're seeing is that the governance requirements, rather than disappearing, they will be increasing. But as long as we understand the context and the overview as to why we've got these things in the first place, then we can right size exactly what we need and make sure that the storyline for why they're in place is a little bit more positive than just because the auditors have told us to have it. But yeah.
I mean, from the customer's perspective, right, they're embarking on these digital transformations anyway. A lot of our customers are doing the S4 HANA migrations as we speak. This just highlights the need to consider the control solutions around that.
Fantastic. And yeah, the interesting point for me on this is that the governance side of things is a really strong lens within which to view the wider and broader identity management solutions as well. So we can't divorce those two worlds too far from each other because it's one side or the other of the same coin. You can't succeed in everything without considering that wider governance angle.
The way that I think about that is think about all of the effort that people put into getting SOX compliant over the last 20 years. Retrofitting segregation of duties over existing authorization concepts. This gives you the opportunity to build your solutions with a secure by design approach and avoid a lot of that regret cost post-implementation.
Let's hope so.
That's always the goal, right?
So from moving from the governance area where there is a whole new suite of things that are coming to the table, what we did want to highlight is that it's not all hopelessness and saying that SAP is going to stop providing identity management solutions and going to leave all of their clients hanging when it comes to that kind of functionality. And if we just look at the visuals there, out of all of the different product sets that SAP is offering, we're only talking about the identity management one that's really being sunset, apart from Solution Manager, which is a slightly different use case. But looking at the NetWeaver side of the fence, there is still some of those capabilities required. Access control will still exist. There is still the features and functions across that. But we're also looking at the cloud estate still being supported by SAP, still having SAP badged products that will continue to run the ecosystem for SAP. So fundamentally, SAP is not leaving their clients hanging. it's still continuing to innovate and still bringing products to market that supports the ecosystem and the demands of what clients are looking at. So it's far from a picking up the ball and running home with it to say that we're not supporting this requirement. It almost completely reversed. There is still those technology sets able to build those integrations and connect to those sorts of applications, particularly on the cloud platform. And I suppose, Tom, that almost speaks to the point that SAP are going deep into the cloud provider and cloud platform type approach. They're wanting to be that first choice cloud supplier. So again, what's your perspectives on that? How do you see it?
I mean, you hit the nail on the head. They've not been shy about saying they want to be a cloud-first solution provider. That's been their direction for a number of years. They're backing it wholeheartedly. Most of our customers are using some elements of the SAP cloud solutions, whether it's SuccessFactors, Concur, Reba. I think the increased integration with those cloud solutions supports the customer's journey. A lot of customers want to get off on premise. They want to start making somebody else's problem for patching and infrastructure maintenance, right? Close to our heart, vulnerability management, etc. So I like the idea of using the cloud platform. I do understand that it's a bit of a leap for those of us who've been doing it for as long as we have, to start to think about not having on-premise servers, not having to have those responsibilities. But it's in service of a wider business objective, which is increased agility, decreased time to market, increased value. So I think it's a good way for them to back it. It also opens the door to a conversation about, is SAP still the right solution for us? And I think there will be customers who take that angle as well and want to take a look at more enterprise-based solutions for enterprise-level problems. And it provides an opportunity to do that. It can be scary, but at the same time, you have the capability to take a look at how you're dealing with these problems at the moment, whether you're optimized in your operations, and can you align better with what your wider information security organization or your CIO is trying to achieve across the estate.
That's a fantastic point. And I think one of the things to mention on here is that this is a very SAP-centric landscape. And one of the things that we've been seeing is the aspiration and the desire and the need to go across the enterprise applications estate. So we're not just talking about SAP here, we're talking about wider than that. And if we're not looking at the identity solutions that are best in class or best fitting across a myriad of different technologies that includes SAP, then fundamentally we're missing a trick. And that may well be aligned with the use cases of SAP identity management being slightly limited in that can only really work when you've got an SAP environment at the source and at the heart of your organizations. And if that's not any longer the case, then it makes sense that clients and customers are starting to evaluate this more broadly and understand whether we've got the right underpinning technology, as well as the business enablement and the clarity of the direction to really make the transformation state that we want to see across the enterprise identity and consumer IAM world.
Yeah, and it's worth bearing in mind that in certain areas, SAP has been leading the world in this sort of enterprise or identity governance conversation. Other applications are only now starting to think about segregation of duties enforcement. We've been doing it 20, 25 years, right? It's been an important part of that provisioning puzzle in the SAP state. And for those of us that have gone grey and lost hair doing access remediations, etc., it sometimes feels a little bit painful. But it really was cutting edge at the time to be able to enforce these things and to put the capability in place to ensure that you're provisioning access securely to systems. So I think it's a good opportunity to explore the capabilities. Talking of which.
Yeah, so let's do that. Okay, so there are, of course, a number of options. There are always a number of options, but I'm sure a lot of the audience has recognized that there's been a bit of media attention on SAP and Microsoft joining forces. Commercially, they've got closer together, and there's clearly some executives that have transitioned from one to the other and done some alliances as well. So it probably wasn't a major surprise, even for those who weren't so familiar with the technology set, that SAP has come out and publicly endorsed Entra as an option to move forward with. It was a slightly interesting one, but not a massive surprise where we saw that coming through. To the point that Entra's logos have been put onto SAP proprietary materials, as you can see from the screenshot there. Very technical diagram, but that notwithstanding, there's a Microsoft logo alongside the SAP ones in the business transformation platform. So that would appear to be SAP's implicit recommendation, or at least tacit recommendation, that Entra is pretty much the go-to provider for what SAP Identity Management was doing. But I'm not sure that we think that that's the complete end state for every client. Certainly Entra does have some good toolkit type capabilities. There's a core of the Microsoft 365 platform that does sit pretty much ubiquitously across a lot of the corporate landscape. And so it does make sense that in some quarters, Entra is a good evaluation path. But I think it would be quite churlish if every single client suddenly went, Entra is the answer. But again, looking back to where you've seen some of this intelligence coming through, Tom, what have you seen about the reaction to having Entra almost one-upped in SAP's literature?
I mean, I agree with your point about the enterprise, right? Microsoft or the 365 suite is probably managing a big part of their business, almost as much in terms of IT as SAP is managing in terms of revenue generation, right?
Yeah.
So it's certainly in the mix for evaluation, but I think a number of SAP customers, because of the industries that they operate hybrid landscapes, combinations of cloud and on-premise solutions, legacy estates. They run manufacturing and operational technology estates that aren't necessarily governed by Active Directory domain controllers, or have slight idiosyncrasies where they have to provision identity to even physical identity, right? Door access control systems to get into a generator room in a power station. Those kind of solutions aren't necessarily easy use cases for a lot of SAP customers to meet. So whilst Entra should be in the mix for evaluation, I think for some of our customers, it's not necessarily going to be the fait accompli of, yeah, well, SAP have said Entra, so we're definitely going down that route.
Yeah, agreed. And as wonderful as Entra is, I certainly haven't seen any access governance functionality in there. I've seen a lot of capabilities about how can we assign this to that and how can we authenticate somebody to this. But I've not seen any kind of checks and balances about whether that's the right thing to have done in the first place. It's more of a fulfillment than a decision-making aid.
Anyone who's tried to do sort of data loss prevention or data access management solutions within the Microsoft stack knows gaining visibility is getting better, but it's never been as straightforward as you'd like. So yeah, I think there is work to do in that space. I'm hoping that that's what we'll see in the roadmap for the integrations.
Yeah. So moving on, and I think this is probably where we'll spend, well, we could talk for hours on this, couldn't we? But let's try not to, and start walking through some of the things that we think clients may well want to consider. And for me, I think that a lot of it is, let's not race to the technical solution. Let's understand what the non-technical needs are, including the aspirations and the objectives of the organizations in which we're making this change, and the maturity across all of the non-technical components to really then help us to make the right decision about what the enabling tooling ought to be. And you can pick whichever technical solution you want. And if you fill that solution with suboptimal processes and poor people-based decisions, you're still going to get a suboptimal outcome, hey? And
never mind the data.
I'm sorry, mate?
Never mind the data that you put into it.
Well, yeah, that too. So I think the non-technical components are as important as the technical components are in this decision. So racing towards the technology is probably a misstep when we're considering what this transformation means for the environments.
Yeah, and I think you've called it out in the right-hand box here, but SAP does not exist in a bubble. You know, governing identity, yes, it is a critical business enabling system. Yes, if it goes down or it suffers a breach, it's going to have a significant material impact on your business. But it's not the only system that you need to consider here. And this is the opportunity to think about it in an enterprise way, or as you've captured it, the global landscape, right? I think the other piece is to then zoom to the box on the left. On-prem or cloud architecture, that doesn't mean what am I operating today? What are my 5-year aspirations? What's my digital transformation journey? Am I adopting a new ERP landscape? Am I moving everything to the cloud in 5 years? What is the organization's objective there? Those bits need to be considered. Then you can take a look at the processes that govern the access to that. So understand the ecosystem in which you're operating. Definitely get your processes in place. I mean, we've got the perfect state of this is that identity is provisioned as soon as somebody's hired, right? And they walk in, their laptop, their door entry, all the access to systems is there waiting for them day one. How many customers have truly achieved that?
I'm still waiting to find one, to be fair.
I spoke to one the other day who had 20-day dwell time.
That's not quite ideal, is it?
It makes a good business case for investment, though, doesn't it? I can reduce your idle time for your employees by 20 days per employee. Yeah, and then I think the access control piece, that's an important part of it, especially with SAP. These two are tied together, the compliance angle. For a lot of our customers, if they're not able to report on access, to govern the access, to enforce segregation duties, it's a license to operate issue. You know, if you're heavily regulated by Sarbanes-Oxley or the FDA or the Transport Security Administration, or you're in critical national infrastructure, or dealing with any sort of regulation, there is a cybersecurity component to those regulations that says you have to govern identity effectively. And identity provisioning solutions are slightly separate from identity governance solutions. There are tools out there that claim that they can do both full features and functionality. I'm still on the fence as to whether that's the way to go. I think for some use cases it works, but I'm a big fan of letting solutions do what they're good at, right? Some are very, very good at managing the provisioning and governance elements. Some are very, very good at managing the compliance elements. What we saw with the roadmap for GRC is that they're bringing the compliance and risk management elements alongside the controls execution elements in that integrated stack. I think that's the right way to go. I think those will still be separate modules doing what they're good at, but within one stack where you can tie those worlds together.
Exactly. But I just to add to that, I think that there's a huge question missing from here, which is why. Why are we doing this in the first place? And again, it's coming back to that organizational objective. And to your point about if we don't do this, we might get a fine from the SOX regulators or the FDA. Well, yes, you might. But if we can meet those anticipated compliance objectives more streamlined, more easily, it allows us to bring newer products to market. It allows us to have that ready to go area, and it allows us to really embed ourselves in the driving seat of all of the good things that our organizations are striving to achieve. So increasing the ability to do more and freeing up the investment capital to enable us to do it, because we've got all of this nailed from the outset. We know what we're trying to achieve, and we're using the best-in-class technology that really allows us to harness that energy and put it into a much more purposeful direction.
Oh, I think that's a fantastic point. You know, quite a lot of the time, security, risk management, and those elements are seen as a constraint to the business. I think this is one area where that time to value, that reduction in support spend, first and foremost, is, you know, obviously attractive to your CFO, but also just the operational reality of users have access to what they need when they need it means that your business is able to operate in a much more innovative and agile manner, react to new markets, react to new product lines, get those things out. And it's a way for us to be seen as an enabler for those business processes rather than something that is constraining them. So yeah, that's a really important point. Is it's not just about saying no; it's about saying yes with the right controls in place.
Fantastic. So I'm sure all of us will be able to say yes to at least one of these different options, but this isn't an end state. This isn't the total list of things that are available to you. This is a sample of some of the technological solutions that may well be available. So I don't want to dwell too far onto this, but the important aspect for me is, regardless of which one of these you choose, understanding the logic for where you're at and where you're trying to get to will influence which one of these or more you choose. So it's largely irrelevant what your technical solution is, but know that there is a technical solution that will work for you. And whichever way you choose, there should be logic and an awareness of how you're making that choice. And if clients are struggling to plot their way through that, then I'm sure there's ways and means for them to get help to understand what is important and what to consider, or the positives and negatives of each of those different steps forward.
Yeah, I think to build on that as well, you have to understand where you are right now. And I do think that that can be a challenge when we talk about SAP in the context of enterprise identity governance. You know, we see customers who have adopted a best-in-breed solution like a SailPoint for their enterprise identity, but their implementation partner didn't want to touch SAP because it's scary and complicated in terms of, instead of just 3 entitlements, it's got 100 million combinations of entitlements because of the authorization objects, right? So having an idea of how well integrated you are with identity governance at that global level, as you called it out on the previous slide, is a really important starting point. This is the opportunity for the SAP application owners, the SAP security functions, to get aligned with the rest of the organization, to understand their digital transformation, cloud adoption, enterprise identity, risk management agenda for the organization over the next 5 years, and contextualize their journey, whichever of these boxes they choose. That should be informed by the growth aspiration of the company, the digital transformation aspiration of the company, the cloud first versus on-premise approach. All of those elements play into it. And that can be difficult to pick apart because not everybody who speaks SAP speaks InfoSec, and vice versa, right?
Yep. It's a good thing that we're fluent in both, isn't it?
Yeah.
Or at least working knowledge in some quarters.
Yeah, I think that's how it would be captured on the CV, right? Understanding that.
Absolutely right. Absolutely right. So I think, yeah, it's important to recognize, having been focused on the non-technical components, just because SAP said that Entra might provide that kind of extension to the solutions that they're not providing anymore, doesn't mean that that's the only game in town. You've already mentioned SailPoint as well, and some of the other technology sets that could be availed to make use of this. Now, we've also included some of the privileged access management providers on this, as well as the IGA giants such as SailPoint. But I think as we see the maturity across identity and access management growing, we're seeing that the dovetailing effect of privileged access and standard identity access is coming forward, and you almost can't do one without the other, because they still have an impact and a positive story to be told when they're done together. But again, it's just useful to understand that there is no one solution that will lead the light, and you may be looking at more of a jigsaw puzzle of which components work to your needs, your business processes, and your maturity levels to enable this to work in a coherent and, well, agile manner.
Yeah, and we could have put how many logos on here? We could have put Okta, we could have put Ping, we could have put One Identity. There's so many players in this space, it can be confusing for our customers. I think I come back to understand where you are. I would highlight that none of these solutions is necessarily going to be 100% fit for your use case. You know, I don't know of anything that works out of the box and connects to everything that you need it to do. So I would always take that risk-based approach to this, which I know is bread and butter to us at Turnkey, because that pretty much informs everything that we do. But which are your critical identities to secure? And I think it's important that Simon called out the privileged account management piece there. When we look at privileged account management within SAP, we're often talking about the EAM module of access controls, right? The in-application elevation of privileges. And a lot of the time, we've not even got visibility of who's got sudo access to a server, or who's got root access to command lines and PowerShell scripts at the infrastructure layer. This is an opportunity to align management of risk associated with identity across all elements of your SAP estate. And that's particularly important as you transform. So as you move from your on-premise in-network, behind 28 firewall, comfortable system that probably hasn't really existed for 10 years at this stage. But certainly as you move towards the cloud, you need these pieces in place to be able to secure yourself, as well as outsourcing to third parties. How are your managed services getting access to your cloud estates? How are you governing third-party remote access to these solutions? And how are those identities governed if they're not within your HR solution or within your Active Directory? So it's a bigger puzzle than just, oh, I have an SAP ID and I have SAP access controls and I understand that it's got no segregation of duties, so I'm good. It's a bigger puzzle. It can look very large, but if you look at it, I don't like the term, and I'm going to use it, Simon, I know you're going to laugh, but if you look at it holistically,
there we go.
Then understand where you are, conduct that assessment, do your evaluation of what meets your needs, and then from that, build a roadmap of how you're going to integrate that, and recognize that, unfortunately, the clock is ticking. We're almost halfway through this year. Next year, we're going to see the next version of GRC, and the year after that, we start seeing sunsetting of these solutions. Now, for a lot of our customers, that investment cycle and the ability to spin up the programs to implement whatever is needed is probably going to need to start by January, right, of 2025, if not before, because these can be difficult problems to solve. So I think if you're embarking on that digital transformation journey, if you are looking at S4, you need to carve out some time to think about how people gain access to the systems in a secure, controlled, risk-aware manner.
Well, that's certainly true. And sometimes it takes that dedicated focus to unwind the spaghetti, take off some of those sticky plasters and those different layered upon layered security patches, which aren't the true security patches in a vulnerability management sense. But a lot of those kind of point solutions or those workarounds that have been put in place over the multiple years of operation that these particular environments have been in action. So yeah, taking the time to understand that, getting out ahead of it will often save a huge amount of regret costs later on, because it's so much easier to do it right first time than it is to come back and retrospectively fix it after the event. Yeah.
And pick a solution that is going to meet your expectations, right? Or at least 80% of your expectations. It's the old 80-20 rule, right?
Exactly. So moving on to the final starting points, where do I start? And I think, Tom, you've summed this up earlier, really, that really understanding your as is as important a step as anything that you could possibly do. So taking a real candid look at what you've currently got, what you're currently doing, how your processes are working, and being honest with yourself about what's currently working well and what's currently available. And it might be more than you think. So there might be shadow IT, there might be more solutions than you're currently aware of already in place, which could then inherently change the direction of travel. But once you clearly understand what you've got, you also really need to understand, well, where am I going? What do we want to achieve with this? Where would I like to be? And what's then the gap between that? So that goal or that aspiration can be expressed again in the negatives of what are the current pain points, what are the current frustrations in my user community, but it could also be some of the optimal control statements or some of the organizational engagement processes as well. So how many times would we see approvers getting frustrated if I don't know what I'm approving, so I'm just clicking the yes button? Now, that could be an organizational change. It could be an engagement management perspective, and it could be a load of other additional elements that we could move forward with that. So factoring some of those organizational change elements into this can really help to put some additional adrenaline and additional go forward into this program. So for me, it's both understanding the as is, understanding the aspirational to be, and then being able to plot your direction through that, through an understanding of the gaps and making the appropriate decisions, yes, on tooling, but more importantly, on the organizational empowerment and the right programs that you should need to be sponsoring and getting that buy-in in a positive sense about how we can achieve this outcome.
Yeah, and this feeds into a question that I got from a customer literally yesterday. I was on site, and they said, how do I build a business case for investment in these solutions? We know we need to do it, but I've got to talk to a CFO at some point. They've got to unlock spend. And I used the example of the 20-day dwell time, right? Back of a cigarette packet mathematics tells me 65,000 users, 5% mobility of that user base at, let's say, $250 a day, right? That's 8.25 million a year lost productivity on a 20-day dwell time across that user base. And that's lowballing one or two of the numbers. So instead of building your business case around, well, we've got to do something with this governance to meet this compliance objective or something like that, you can go to a CFO and say, I can save you 8.25 million a year. Yes, it's going to cost 10% of that to implement this solution or whatever that figure is. But if you're leading with the business case, if you're leading with the efficiencies that you're going to do, getting rid of those user frustrations and gaps that are highlighted in the goals piece, if you're presenting all of the benefits first, then the cost becomes okay, how much does it cost? Rather than start with how much it costs and then try and justify it. So get the support that you need to do that as is assessment, to understand what is painful in your existing processes, show how you can solve those, and build that business case. And you may need help to do that because you might be stuck in your silos within the organization and not looking at the bigger picture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you mentioned questions from some of the clients that you've been working with over the past few months. We have had a couple of questions. I don't know how much time we've got to really motor through them all, but keep firing them in. And if we don't answer them live, then we'll definitely follow up with you afterwards. But one of the questions that I think you've just answered about how do I build a business case for it? So I'll skip past that one. Another one's quite a leading question. Which tool should I buy if I'm wanting to manage all of my SAP and non-SAP applications?
Consulting answer incoming. It depends. You're not going to find any one tool that immediately touches everything. If you are heavily invested in SAP, I would be looking at SAP's preferred solution at the moment. They are backing Entra. I'm not sure that it's fully feature rich at the moment, but I would be using some combination of Entra and the new access governance solution. If you can limp through until we know what that access governance solution looks like, which will be coming out this year with your existing solutions, I would probably keep my powder dry and not throw good money after bad at the moment. But yeah, I would be backing SAP's own if you're heavily invested in that estate. If you've got a large non-SAP estate, you probably want to be looking at a more market-leading top right solution, like a SailPoint combined with a CyberArk or a Beyond Trust for the privileged account management piece.
So I was going to go a slightly different direction with that one, if I'm honest. I mean, from what I've seen with Entra, a lot of it's quite familiar and similar to the IDM capabilities in that it's a toolkit and you build it through scripts and you build it through the configuration and the policies that you want it to do, and you're almost writing it from scratch. I was almost thinking that a lot of the clients that we've seen with particularly the complicated application landscapes SailPoint and similar seem to be providing that kind of framework already in place. It allows you to already kind of take a solution that fundamentally does work. Yes, you have to have some nuance to it. You have to configure some of the elements to do exactly what you want it to do. But things like the IDN solution for that, it does provide you with much more of a solution than a toolkit that you have to put together yourself, particularly the IGA area. And you've got the links with the ARM tool, which provides the access governance overlay, which can integrate directly with IDM. From a PAM point of view, again, CyberArk still top right, Gartner, no issues with that one, but we're also seeing quite a lot of clients looking seriously at Delinea and moving much more towards the Delinea angle, as well as a few that are going towards the Beyond Trust area as well. But certainly the competitor landscape in the PAM space seems a lot tighter, but SailPoint do seem to be leading the way in the IGA space with Entra and Savient following very, very closely behind.
Yeah, there's people snapping at the heels, definitely, but they've secured I think they're in 50% of the Fortune 500 for a reason. There was one quick question that came up just now. If we purchase an enterprise identity solution before SAP's new GRC offering, what if they don't integrate well? Am I creating a customization issue? I have typed a response, but there could be some customization problems there. The expectation is that they're going to focus a little bit more on APIs and integrations. They've recognized that it's never been that easy historically. We've got it working for a number of customers. It's one of the reasons we're good at what we do. But the expectation is that whatever GRC 2026 looks like, it's going to have integrations at the core of it. It's going to have to. I think that's the way the world is going. But watch this space, and if you have issues in that particular area, then you can talk to us about how do we integrate these.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tom. I think we're just about at time, but that's been a really useful session, in my opinion, anyway. Hopefully that's reciprocated in the attendees that have joined us for it. I suppose all it says really on the slide here, thanks for joining us. Want to verbalize that and say thank you to all the people that have joined in live. For those watching on demand, hope you've enjoyed it as well. And if you have any further questions, our contact details are on the screen. Feel free to drop us an email, drop us a line, and like, share, propagate the message out that IDM may be dead, but there's definitely life in identity and access management and the enterprise solutions therein for the foreseeable future. Tom, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure as ever, and I'm sure we'll talk very, very soon.
Thank you.